Hello, ladies and gents, it's Hagbard Celine here, and we're gonna dive right in because this is part 2 of our discussion and analysis of the 48 Laws of Power. This is going to prove to be a long one, so I would advise that you all set aside some time to get through this. I will also be attempting to give some modern comparisons and some examples from recent history up to and including the Donald himself. I will be utilizing Fuck Up to read the laws and the explanation of the laws as given by the original author Robert Greene. Then I will expound upon that point using the examples, some of which will be drawn from his original manuscript, some of which will be drawn from modern times. So, without further ado, The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene.
Law 1. Never outshine the master. Always make those above you feel comfortably superior. In your desire to please or impress them, do not go too far in displaying your talents, or you might accomplish the opposite. Inspire fear and insecurity. Make your master appear more brilliant than they are, and you will attain the heights of power.
To me, Law 1 has always been one of the more obvious laws. However, I say that with the understanding that it requires that you read people exceedingly well. If you're incapable of reading people, then you may struggle to interpret what your master would perceive as outshining. As his example, Robert Greene gives this as transgression of the law. Nicolas Fouquet, Louis XIV's finance minister in the first years of his reign, was a generous man who loved lavish parties, pretty women, and poetry. He also loved money, for he led an extravagant lifestyle. Fouquet was clever and very much indispensable to the king, so when the prime minister, Julien Mazarin, died in 1661, the finance minister expected to be named the successor. Instead, the king decided to abolish the position. This and other signs made Fouquet suspect that he was falling out of favor, and so he decided to ingratiate himself with the king by staging the most spectacular party the world had ever seen. The party's ostensible purpose would be to commemorate the completion of Fouquet's chateau, but its real function was to pay tribute to the king, the guest of honor. The most brilliant nobility of Europe and some of the greatest minds of the time attended the party. Molière wrote a play for the occasion in which he himself was to perform at the evening's conclusion. The party began with a lavish 7-course dinner featuring foods from the Orient never before tasted in France, as well as new dishes created especially for the night. The meal was accompanied by music commissioned by Fouquet to honor the king. After dinner, there would be a promenade through the chateau's gardens. The grounds and fountains were to be the inspiration for Versailles. Fouquet personally accompanied the young king through the geometrically aligned arrangements of shrubbery and flower beds, arriving at the garden's canals. They witnessed a fireworks display, which was followed by the performance of Molière's play. The party ran well into the night, and everyone agreed it was the most amazing affair they had ever attended. The next day, Fouquet was arrested by the king's head musketeer. 3 months later, he went on trial for stealing from the country's treasury. Actually, most of the stealing he was accused of, he had done on the king's behalf and with the king's permission. Fouquet was found guilty and sent to the most isolated prison in France, high in the Pyrenees Mountains, where he spent the last 20 years of his life in solitary confinement. The interpretation is that Louis XIV, the Sun King, was a proud and arrogant man who wanted to be the center of attention at all times. He could not countenance being outdone in lavishness by anyone, and certainly not his finance minister. To succeed Fouquet, Louis chose Jean-Baptiste Colbert, a man famous for his parsimony in forgiving the dullest parties in Paris. Colbert made sure that any money liberated from the treasury went straight to Louis's hands. With the money, Louis built a palace even more magnificent than Fouquet's, the glorious Palace of Versailles. He used the same architects, decorators, and garden designer. At Versailles, Louis hosted parties even more extravagant than the ones that had cost Fouquet his freedom. Let us examine the situation. The evening of the party, as Fouquet presented spectacle on spectacle to Louis, each more magnificent than the one before, he imagined the affair as demonstrating his loyalty and devotion to the king. Not only did he think the party would put him back in the king's favor, he thought it would show his good taste, his connections, his popularity, making him indispensable to the king, and demonstrating that he would make an excellent prime minister. Instead, however, each new spectacle, each appreciative smile bestowed by the guests upon Fouquet, made it seem to Louis that his own friends and subjects were more charmed by the finance minister than by the king himself, and that Fouquet was actually flaunting his wealth and power, rather than flattering Louis XIV. Fouquet's elaborate party offended the king's vanity. Louis would not admit this to anyone, of course. Instead, he found a convenient excuse to rid himself of a man who had inadvertently made him feel insecure. Such is the fate, in some form or another, of all those who unbalance the master's sense of self, poke holes in his vanity, or make him doubt his preeminence. When the evening began, Fouquet was on top of the world. By the time it had ended, he was at the bottom. Voltaire.
Law 2. Never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies. Be wary of friends. They will betray you more quickly, for they are easily aroused to envy. They also become spoiled and tyrannical. But hire a former enemy, and he will be more loyal than a friend, because he has more to prove. In fact, you have more to fear from friends than from enemies. If you have no enemies, find a way to make them.
In modern politics, you find a couple of good examples for making enemies your friends, since we live in a godless society where everyone's a mercenary for the right price, and it's much harder to murder important personalities, unless you work for the Russian government, of course. Abraham Lincoln did so with his cabinet, as was outlined in Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln. John F. Kennedy chose his former bitter rival, Lyndon Johnson, for the position of vice president, and despite the Kennedy and Johnson clans having a huge feud, leaving no ill word unspoken. Barack Obama did the same with Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump hired college professor Sam Colvins, who insulted him, his strategy, and viewpoints a mere 35 days before his promotion, and is now praising his new master, like a good puppy does. Their main reasons for doing so was to remove their enemies from their former position, which made it almost mandatory for the enemies to work against them, and thus eliminating the threat emanating from them. People close to you, working for you, can be grasped by a firmer grip, and hence you are able better to control their actions. A seemingly positive promotion can actually serve your interests much more than theirs. Usually, enemies of a high quality and caliber also bring a lot of experience as well as expertise to the table. The friends of your new friend are probably your friends as well. This is why Hillary is talking about the legacy of Barack Obama must be saved. Always keep in mind that most of these arrangements were beneficial to both parties. Otherwise, it would have never worked. It is not easy to create such a situation where you are able to use your enemies as your pawns.
Law 3. Conceal your intentions. Keep people off balance and in the dark by never revealing the purpose behind your actions. If they have no clue what you are up to, they cannot prepare a defense. Guide them far enough down the wrong path, envelope them in enough smoke, and by the time they realize your intentions, it will be too late.
Conceal your intentions by engulfing them in a sea of lies. For example, General Schwarzkopf, shortly before the invasion of Kuwait, he spoke about invading by sea. Then, when the invasion actually happened, he took the land route instead. Largo used fake sincerity to deceive and ultimately destroy Othello by voicing seemingly valid concerns about the infidelity of Desdemona. He did it in a subtle way without coming off as too aggressive, and hence was able to deceive Othello. Henry Kissinger followed a simple but effective game plan of boring his enemies to death with dry facts and boring speeches before slamming the fist on the table and hitting them with a fierce iron fist, making demands, threats, turning the tables of the negotiation in the course. In 1711, John Churchill wanted to invade France during the War of Spanish Succession, and crafted a plan to achieve this goal. There was a fort in his way, and he knew that by destroying the fort, protecting the road into the heart of France, he would arouse suspicion, and the French would know what he had planned. Instead of destroying the fort himself, he captured and held it, leading to the fake appearance of the fort being an asset of strategic value to the Duke. The French recaptured the fort and burned it to the ground, believing that they had crossed the Duke's plan of fortifying himself in that position. The Duke planned this all along, and now the path to France was unprotected, and the French didn't expect him to take that path with his invasion force. Have you ever heard of a skillful general who intends to surprise a citadel announcing his plan to the enemy? Conceal your purpose and hide your progress. Do not disclose the extent of your designs until they cannot be opposed, until the combat is over. Win the victory before you declare the war. In a word, imitate those warlike people whose designs are not known except by the ravaged country through which they have passed. Ninon Dilonque.
Law 4. Always say less than necessary. When you are trying to impress people with words, the more you say, the more common you appear, and the less in control. Even if you are saying something banal, it will appear original if you make it vague, open-ended, and sphinx-like. Powerful people impress and intimidate by saying less. The more you say, the more likely you are to say something foolish. Law 5. So much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life. Reputation is the cornerstone to power. Through reputation alone, you can intimidate and win. Once you slip, however, you are vulnerable and will be attacked on all sides. Make your reputation unassailable. Always be alert to potential attacks and thwart them before they happen. Meanwhile, learn to destroy your enemies by opening holes in their own reputations. Then, stand aside and let public opinion hang them.
During the War of the Three Kingdoms, a general called Liang managed to establish a fearsome reputation for himself as being an almost invincible leader and master strategist. Having to face him in battle was an unthankful task for every commander, for it meant an almost certain defeat. One reason was Liang's masterfully crafted battle plans, but also the psychological effect of his fierce reputation, which could single-handedly win battles by demoralizing the enemy. In one particular case, his reputation saved both his and his men's life. His enemy, Sima Yi, led a huge army against a city Liang was defending, outnumbering his enemy by such a huge margin that victory was certain. Liang knew that his army didn't stand a chance, no matter how desperate and vicious they fought, so he had to resort to deception and reverse psychology. He put on a Taoist robe and took a seat on the platform over the gates, playing a gyukin, similar to a flute, with all the calmness in the world. When approaching the city, Sima Yi saw his arch-enemy playing an instrument mocking him and showing no signs of fear. Believing this to be a trap, he decided to abandon the attack and ordered his vast army to retreat. While it did cross his mind that Liang was indeed outnumbered and defenseless, his opponent's reputation got the better of him, and he put his army to flight. This trick is also known as the empty fort strategy. When it comes to attacking reputation, a power play involving mutual attacks on reputation can be found easily in a modern example of Occupy Wall Street. Both sides participated in forms of it, while one being much more successful than the other. The Occupy Wall Street movement undertook an overt attack against the hated 1%, scratching their reputation in the course of the demonstration. A good plan, but it fades when compared to what the 1% did. Not surprisingly, because there's a reason, like it or not, that the 1% is the 1%. And it's not always luck, but superior Machiavellian qualities. They decided the best course of action was to attack the movement's reputation by infiltrating it from within, and making a joke out of them. They hired hippies who turned the movement into a circus, and soon after, everybody believed that the 99% were bums who wanted to relive Woodstock, leading to the devastation of their credibility. Though there's one thing they did right, and that is to attack the reputation of big institutions. Everyone has a major interest in protecting his reputation, and an attack on his most valuable asset will bother him, forcing him to act and make mistakes. In this case, the enemy outsmarted the actually pretty big Occupy movement and showed their superiority once more. To kill a man, you need to kill his reputation. If you merely kill his physical hull, he's going to go down in history as a martyr. If your reputation is meager and your enemy is strong but not untouchable, a slanderous attack on him is a good course of action, for he has much more to lose than you. Use subtle ways to attack your enemy. Don't go out guns blazing and hurt yourself more than you do your adversary. Keep the example of Doris Burris in mind, who tried to overtly attack the reputation of her former friend, but massively failed at disguising her seemingly subtle attack, hence arousing resentment. An example of a subtle attack would be to sow doubt. Even if proven innocent, the doubt will remain. For example, if someone is accused of rape, but not convicted of it in a court, people will never look at that person in the same way.
Law 6. Court attention at all costs. Everything is judged by its appearance. What is unseen counts for nothing. Never let yourself get lost in the crowd, then, or buried in oblivion. Stand out. Be conspicuous at all costs. Make yourself a magnet of attention by appearing larger, more colorful, more mysterious than the bland and timid masses.
Robert Greene himself gives as an observance of the law. P.T. Barnum, American's premier 19th century showman, started his career as an assistant to the owner of a circus, Aaron Turner. In 1836, the circus stopped at Annapolis, Maryland, for a series of performances. On the morning of opening day, Barnum took a stroll through town, wearing a new black suit. People started to follow him. Someone in the gathering crowd shouted out that it was Reverend Ephraim K. Avery, infamous as a man acquitted of the charge of murder but still believed guilty by most Americans. The angry mob tore Barnum's suit and was ready to lynch him. After desperate appeals, Barnum finally convinced them to follow him to the circus, where he could verify his identity. Once there, old Turner confirmed that it was all a practical joke. He himself had spread the rumor that Barnum was Avery. The crowd dispersed, but Barnum, who had nearly been killed, was not amused. He wanted to know what could have induced his boss to play such a trick. "My dear Mr. Barnum," Turner replied, "it was all for our own good. Remember, all we need to ensure success is notoriety." And indeed, everyone in town was talking about the joke, and the circus was packed that night, and every night it stayed in Annapolis. Barnum had learned a lesson he would never forget. Barnum's first big venture of his own was the American Museum, a collection of curiosities located in New York. One day, a beggar approached Barnum in the street. Instead of giving him money, Barnum decided to employ him. Taking him back to his museum, he gave the man 5 bricks and told him to make a slow circuit of several blocks. At certain points, he was to lay down a brick on the sidewalk, always keeping 1 brick in hand. On the return journey, he was to replace each brick on the street with the one he held. Meanwhile, he was to remain serious of countenance and answer no questions. Once back at the museum, he was to enter, walk around inside, and then leave through the back door and make the same bricklaying circuit again. On the man's first walk through the streets, several hundred people watched his mysterious movements. By his 4th circuit, onlookers swarmed around him, debating what he was doing. Every time he entered the museum, he was followed by people who bought tickets to keep watching him. Many of them were distracted by the museum's collections and stayed inside. By the end of the first day, the brickman had drawn over 1,000 people into the museum. A few days later, the police ordered him to cease and desist from his walks. The crowds were blocking traffic. The bricklaying stopped, but thousands of New Yorkers had entered the museum, and many of those had become P.T. Barnum converts. Barnum would put a band of musicians on a balcony overlooking the street beneath a huge banner proclaiming free music for the millions. What generosity, New Yorkers thought, and they flocked to hear the free concerts. But Barnum took pains to hire the worst musicians he could find. And soon after the band struck up, people would hurry to buy tickets to the museum, where they would be out of earshot of the band's noise and of the booing of the crowd. One of the first oddities Barnum toured around the country was Joyce Heth, a woman he claimed was 161 years old, and whom he advertised as a slave who had once been George Washington's nurse. After several months, the crowds began to dwindle, so Barnum sent an anonymous letter to the papers, claiming that Heth was a clever fraud. Joyce Heth, he wrote, is not a human being, but an automaton, made up of whalebone, India rubber, and numberless springs. Those who had not bothered to see her before were immediately curious, and those who had already seen her paid to see her again, to find out whether the rumor that she was a robot was true. In 1842, Barnum purchased the carcass of what was purported to be a mermaid. The creature resembled a monkey with the body of a fish, but the head and the body were perfectly joined. It was truly a wonder. After some research, Barnum discovered that the creature had been expertly put together in Japan, where the hoax had caused quite a stir. He nevertheless planted articles in newspapers around the country claiming the capture of a mermaid in the Fiji Islands. He also sent the papers woodcut prints of paintings showing mermaids. By the time he had showed the specimen in his museum, a national debate had been sparked over the existence of these mythical creatures. A few months before Barnum's campaign, No one had cared or even known about mermaids. Now everyone was talking about them as if they were real. Crowds flocked in record numbers to see the Fiji mermaid and to hear debates on the subject. A few years later, Barnum toured Europe with General Tom Thumb, a 5-year-old dwarf from Connecticut, whom Barnum claimed was an 11-year-old English boy, and whom he had trained to do many remarkable acts. During his tour, Barnum's name attracted such attention that Queen Victoria, that paragon of sobriety, requested a private audience with him and his talented dwarf at Buckingham Palace. The English press may have ridiculed Barnum, but Victoria was royally entertained by him and respected him ever after.
Law 7. Get others to do the work for you, but always take the credit. Use the wisdom, knowledge, and legwork of other people to further your own cause. Not only will such assistance give you valuable time and energy, it will give you a godlike aura of efficiency and speed. In the end, your helpers will be forgotten, and you will be remembered. Never do yourself what others can do for you.
Getting someone to do the work, but always taking credit, is probably as old as work itself, even older than the concept of modern work. I'm pretty sure that our ancestors made other people hunt and subsequently took their prey. Our world has always been an eat or be eaten world, and evolution took care of those who have been eaten. Hyenas in the wild are capable of bullying and stealing from larger predatory animals prey that they otherwise could not have taken down themselves. Shakespeare is said to have plagiarized and taken credit for many a great work by other authors and playwrights. Some people even accuse him of not having written anything himself. Still, his name is eternal and will continue to live on and leave footprints. Steve Jobs is an example of someone said to have stolen or at least purveyed the work of others as his own. Although, to call it outright theft may be unfair, I think we have a much stronger case in the interactions between Edison and Nikola Tesla. Greene himself stole the work of Balthasar Gracian, Niccolo Machiavelli, Sun Tzu, and many others to create the 48 Laws of Power. I'm by no means judging him. Rather, I'm thankful that Robert Greene had the opportunity to steal from these other great minds in history and deliver one of the finest books ever written. As a matter of fact, much of even this little speech you've been listening to has been taken from several sources around the internet. We all do it. The key is to learn to do it skillfully.
Law 8. Make other people come to you. Use bait if necessary. When you force the other person to act, you are the one in control. It is always better to make your opponent come to you, abandoning his own plans in the process. Lure him with fabulous gains, then attack. You hold the cards.
This is another of the laws of the 48 Laws that feels so obvious, but is very difficult to employ until you're in a position of power. Until you're in a position of power, it requires great cunning. Once you're there, it becomes fairly obvious. Trump does it with Trump Tower. The president does it with the Oval Office. Frankly, the communist regime knew better than to destroy the great Russian palaces because they could then take foreign ministers there to impress upon them the glory of the communist regime. All great people, all people of power, have known that you make your enemy come to you, because then you are the one on home field advantage. This is true in one-on-one physical confrontations. This is true of warfare. This is true of politics. This is true of the psychology of interaction. If you manage to bait your enemy into behaving the way that you need them to behave to ensure your victory, then you've attained a very, very powerful tool in the fight. When it comes to baiting techniques, I think I can trust that there are enough trolls on the internet that I don't need to go into them.
Law 9. Win through your actions, never through argument. Any momentary triumph you think gained through argument is really a pyrrhic victory. The resentment and ill will you stir up is stronger and lasts longer than any momentary change of opinion. It is much more powerful to get others to agree with you through your actions without saying a word. Demonstrate. Do not explicate.
Piero Soderini, the famous mayor of Florence, lived during the time of Da Vinci, Machiavelli, and Michelangelo. He got his hands on a marvelous marble stone. Unfortunately, one of his artists mutilated the stone beyond saving. Many other artists inspected the botched stone and came to the conclusion that it was ruined, all but one. Michelangelo traveled to Florence to see for himself how bad it was. After evaluating the case, he believed himself capable of salvaging it. Piero Soderini was a little skeptical, but in the end, he allowed Michelangelo to start chiseling away. It turned into a true masterpiece, famous far beyond the borders of Italy, David with the slingshot in his hand. As soon as Michelangelo finished this fine work, he showed it to Soderini. Believing himself to be an expert critic of the highest caliber, he informed Michelangelo that David's nose was too big. The major didn't realize what the artist saw, that the angle bastardized the view of the perfect nose. Now, Michelangelo could have explained to Soderini that little fact, risking offending his taste, but instead he chose to do the right thing, which was to show rather than tell. He picked up some dust and his tool and pretended to be working on the nose, dropping some dust in the process. Artfully, he gave the appearance of changing the form of the nose while removing not one single grain of marble. When he was done, he asked Soderini if it was to his liking now. The major agreed and praised Michelangelo for making the nose truly pop and come to life. Michelangelo managed to metaphorically change his mood, not his mind. Victor Lustig, one of the most effective con artists, used the law, win through your actions, never through argument, to get out of a possible deadly situation. One of his schemes was to convince his victims that he owned a machine to print money. A fancy-looking hoax, of course. Selling the machine to quite a few people, he made a small fortune. Most of his victims were so embarrassed that they had been played for fools, they took no action, no vendetta, and they didn't even report the crime to the police. I mean, how do you report the crime of counterfeiting money? One gentleman, Sheriff Richards of Ramsden County, was not an individual who took lightly to being conned. He tracked Victor Lustig down to a hotel and confronted him. He wanted his money back, threatened him, and made a scene. The con man was not impressed and stayed calm. He used a perfect mix of showing and telling. At first, he feigned ignorance and acted confused by the claim that the machine was not working. He then confidently bombarded the sheriff with technical mumbo-jumbo, confusing him. His act oozed confidence and boldness, so the sheriff soon dropped his aggressive behavior. Doubt and insecurity overtook him. Because Lustig was so calm and confident, the sheriff was confused and wanted to believe him. The con man then gave him his money back and promised to visit him in his town to fix the machine. A few days later, the sheriff was arrested. Apparently, he had passed some counterfeit bills. The same bills that he had received from Victor Lustig.
Law 10. Avoid the unhappy and unlucky. You can die from someone else's misery. Emotional states are as infectious as disease. You may feel you are helping the drowning man, but you are only precipitating your own disaster. The unfortunate sometimes draw misfortune on themselves. They will also draw it on you. Associate with the happy and the fortunate instead.
I could go into some detail here, but let's suffice it to say there is no reversal of this law. There is nothing to be gained by associating intentionally with the chronically unlucky or the frankly misfortunate, and I can assure you, from all of the experience I have ever seen in my entire life, they will gladly sink your lifeboat.
Law 11. Learn to keep people dependent on you. To maintain your independence, you must always be needed and wanted. The more you are relied on, the more freedom you have. Make people depend on you for their happiness and prosperity, and you have nothing to fear. Never teach them enough so that they can do without you.
Otto von Bismarck was a master strategist, knowing when to lay low and when to shine. When he was in his early 30s, he was forced to choose a side. The powerful players in the game were the Kaiser and his strong enemies. Bismarck did something that did not seem smart at first, but he had an ultimate plan in mind. He chose to ally himself with the weaker Kaiser Frederick. Bismarck, known as the Iron Chancellor for a reason, helped lead the monarchy to new heights. His bold and authoritative approach fended off the empire's enemy while fortifying his position as a loyal advisor. The king grew more and more dependent on Bismarck, as did his brother William, who succeeded him. William didn't share his brother's love for Bismarck, but feared him. He could not get rid of him because he knew that he was too weak to rule alone. Hence, he allowed Bismarck to pull the strings behind the throne. Despite having the crown on his head, both he and Bismarck knew who the real master was. A favorable position to find oneself in, because it is not your head who is in peril if the mood of the citizens changed to the worse. By making himself indispensable to his master, Bismarck was able to rule from the shadows, and thus had more power and influence than the Kaiser himself.
Law 12. Use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim. One sincere and honest move will cover over dozens of dishonest ones. Open-hearted gestures of honesty and generosity bring down the guard of even the most suspicious people. Once your selective honesty opens a hole in their armor, you can deceive and manipulate them at will. A timely gift, a Trojan horse, will serve the same purpose.
Duke Wu of Chang married off his daughter and killed one of his ministers in order to take over the powerful kingdom of Hu. The ruler of Hu heard that the minister was executed for telling Chang to conquer the kingdom of Hu. Hu's ruler also considered the marriage of Chang's daughter and other acts of kindness from Chang and let down his guard. A few weeks later, Chang forces swept through Hu and took the country, never to relinquish it. Few people can resist a gift, even from the most hardened enemy, which is why it is often the perfect way to disarm people. A gift brings out the child in us instantly, lowering our defenses. Although we often view other people's actions in the most cynical of lights, we rarely see the Machiavellian elements of a gift, which quite often hide ulterior motives. A gift is the perfect object in which to hide a deceptive move. Unless you can make this gesture seem sincere and heartfelt, do not play with fire. If people see through it, their disappointed feelings of gratitude and warmth will become the most violent of hatred and distrust.
Law 13. When asking for help, appeal to people's self-interests, never their mercy or gratitude. If you need to turn to an ally for help, do not bother to remind him of your past assistance and good deeds. He will find a way to ignore you. Instead, uncover something in your request or in your alliance with him that will benefit him, and emphasize it out of all proportion. He will respond enthusiastically when he sees something to be gained for himself.
In 433 BC, just before the Peloponnesian War, the island of Corsica and the Greek city-state of Corinth stood on the brink of conflict. Both parties sent ambassadors to Athens to try and win over the Athenians to their side. The stakes were high, since whoever had Athens on his side was sure to win, and whoever won the war would certainly give the defeated side no mercy. Corsica spoke first. The ambassador began by admitting that the island had never helped Athens before, and in fact had allied itself with Athens' enemies, and there were no ties of friendship or gratitude between Corsica and Athens. Yes, the ambassador admitted, he had come to Athens now out of fear and concern for Corsica's safety. The only thing he could offer was an alliance of mutual interests. Corsica had a navy only surpassed in size and strength by Athens' own. An alliance between the two states would create a formidable force, one that could intimidate the rival state of Sparta. That, unfortunately, was all Corsica had to offer. The representative from Corinth then gave a brilliant, passionate speech in sharp contrast to the dry, colorless approach of the Corsican. He talked of everything Corinth had done for Athens in the past. He asked how it would look to Athens, other allies, if the city put an agreement with a former enemy over one with a present friend, one that had served Athens' interests loyally. Perhaps those allies would break their agreements with Athens if they saw that their loyalty was not valued. He referred to Hellenic law and the need to repay Corinth for all its good deeds. He finally went on to list the many services Corinth had performed for Athens, and the importance of showing gratitude to one's friends. After the speech, the Athenians debated the issue in an assembly. On the second round, they voted overwhelmingly to ally with Corsica and drop Corinth. Greene's interpretation reads, "History has remembered the Athenians nobly, but they were preeminent realists of classical Greece. With them, all the rhetoric, all the emotional appeals in the world could not match a good, pragmatic argument, especially one that added to their power." What the Corinthian ambassador did not realize was that his references to Corinth's past generosity to Athens only irritated the Athenians, subtly asking them to feel guilty and putting them under obligation. The Athenians couldn't care less about past favors and friendly feelings. At the same time, they knew that if their other allies thought them ungrateful for abandoning Corinth, these city-states would still be unlikely to break their ties to Athens, the preeminent Greek power. Athens ruled its empire by force, and would simply compel any rebellious ally to return to the fold. When people choose between talk about the past and talk about the future, a pragmatic person will always opt for the future and forget the past. As the Corsicans realized, it is always best to speak pragmatically to a pragmatic person. And, in the end, most people are, in fact, pragmatic. They will rarely act against their own self-interests. It has always been a rule that the weak should be the subject to the strong, and besides, we consider that we are worthy of our power. Up to the present moment, you, too, used to think that we were, but now, after calculating your own interest, you are beginning to talk in terms of right and wrong. Considerations of this kind have never yet turned people aside from the opportunities of aggrandizement offered by superior strength. The Athenian representative to Sparta, quoted in the Peloponnesian War.
Law 14. Pose as a friend, work as a spy. Knowing about your rival is critical. Use spies to gather valuable information that will keep you a step ahead. Better still, play the spy yourself. In polite social encounters, learn to probe. Ask indirect questions, and get people to reveal their weaknesses and intentions. There is no occasion that is not an opportunity for artful spying.
This is one that I argue that the reversal is perhaps more important than the law. Because what Greene is really saying here is use social interactions to the benefit of yourself as best you can in every situation, preferably without damaging the other person. If it helps, think of spies as X-rays or MRIs before a procedure. We used to just do exploratory surgery. We're more civilized now. That said, however, Robert Greene has the reversal as information is critical to power, but just as you spy on other people, you must be prepared for them to spy on you. One of the most potent weapons in the battle of information, then, is giving out false information. As Winston Churchill said, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies. You must surround yourself with such a bodyguard so that your truth cannot be penetrated. By planting the information of your choice, you control the game. In 1944, the Nazis' rocket bomb attacks of London suddenly escalated. Over 2,000 V-1 flying bombs fell on the city, killing more than 5,000 people and wounding many more. Somehow, however, the Germans consistently missed their targets. Bombs that were intended for Tower Bridge or Piccadilly would fall well short of the city, landing in the less populated suburbs. This was because, in fixing their targets, the Germans relied on secret agents they had planted in England. They did not know that these agents had been discovered, and that, in their place, English-controlled agents were feeding them subtly deceptive information. The bombs would hit farther and farther from their targets every time they fell. By the end of the campaign, they were landing on cows in the country. By feeding people wrong information, then, you gain a potent advantage. While spying gives you a third eye, disinformation puts out one of your enemy's eyes. A Cyclops, he will always miss his target.
Law 15. Crush your enemy totally. All great leaders since Moses have known that a feared enemy must be crushed completely. Sometimes they have learned this the hard way. If one ember is left alight, no matter how dimly it smolders, a fire will eventually break out. More is lost through stopping halfway than total annihilation. The enemy will recover and seek revenge. Crush him, not only in body, but in spirit.
This law is extremely important to understand because an undefeated enemy is a viper that you're simply allowing to heal to strike at you again. This is all the more true with a former friend who has now become an enemy. The law governing fatal antagonism reads, reconciliation is out of the question. You must exterminate, crush, and deny them the chance to return to haunt you. Such is the case of Sang Yu and his enemy, Liu Piang. Sang had proven his ruthlessness on many occasions, but with Liu Piang he acted differently. Every time he had his rival in his hands, something made him hesitate. A fatal sympathy or respect for the man who had once been a friend and a comrade in arms. But the moment that Xiang made it clear that he intended to do away with Liu, yet failed to accomplish it, he sealed his own doom. Liu would not suffer the same hesitation once the tables were turned. Now, Sang Yu was on the run from Liu, and he came upon a small group of his own retreating soldiers. He cried out, I hear Liu Piang has offered 1,000 pieces of gold and a fief of 10,000 families for his head. Let me do you a favor. He then slit his own throat and died. It is not, of course, a question of murder. It is a question of banishment. Sufficiently weakened and then exiled from your world, your enemies are rendered harmless, toothless. They have no hope of recovering, insinuating themselves or hurting you, And if they cannot be banished, at least understand that they are plotting against you, and pay no heed whatsoever to any friendliness that they feign.
Law 16. Use absence to increase respect and honor. Too much circulation makes the price go down. The more you are seen and heard from, the more common you appear. If you are already established in a group, temporary withdrawal from it will make you more talked about, even more admired. You must learn when to leave. Create value through scarcity.
We see the tactic of absence used to increase respect or honor in this year's presidential race. You saw Donald Trump do it when he skipped out on the first GOP candidate forum. If you recall, Trump suggested that he might skip one of the debates, which got him no end of press and attention. Remember, that's a previous law. He is also behaving like an incumbent and refusing to debate challengers, which was also a tactic employed by Hillary Clinton against Bernie Sanders with quite a bit of success this year. Hence, some feel it's the crowning of Hillary. And we saw the opposite of this being employed by Sanders to what would be called mixed results.
Law 17. Keep others in suspended terror. Cultivate an air of unpredictability. Humans are creatures of habit with an insatiable need to see familiarity in other people's actions. Your predictability gives them a sense of control. Turn the tables. Be deliberately unpredictable. Behavior that seems to have no consistency or purpose will keep them off balance, and they will wear themselves out trying to explain your moves. Taken to an extreme, this strategy can intimidate and terrorize.
In 1974, Muhammad Ali and George Foreman were scheduled to fight for the World Heavyweight Boxing Championship. In a press conference before the big fight, he said he was going to change his style and punch it out with Foreman. No one, least of all Foreman, believed this for a second. To everyone's amazement, Ali did exactly what he said he was going to do. As Foreman waited for him to dance around, Ali went right up to him and slugged it out. He completely upset his opponent's strategy. At a loss, Foreman ended up wearing himself out. Not by chasing Ali, but by throwing punches wildly and taking more and more counterpunches. Finally, Ali landed a dramatic right cross that knocked out Foreman. The habit of assuming that a person's behavior will fit his previous patterns is so strong that not even Ali's announcement of a strategic change was enough to upset it. Foreman walked right into the trap that he had been told to expect. As a warning, unpredictability can work against you sometimes, especially if you are in a subordinate position. There are times when it is better to let people feel comfortable and settled around you than to disturb them. Too much unpredictability will be seen as a sign of indecisiveness or even some more serious psychiatric problem. Such power should only be used judiciously.
Law 18. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous. The world is dangerous, and enemies are everywhere. Everyone has to protect themselves. A fortress seems the safest, but isolation exposes you to more dangers than it protects you from. It cuts you off from valuable information. It makes you a conspicuous and an easy target. Better to circulate among people you find allies and mingle. You are shielded from your enemies by the crowd.
Qin Shi Huangti, the first emperor of China, was the mightiest man of his day. His empire was vaster and more powerful than that of Alexander the Great. He had conquered all of the kingdoms surrounding his own kingdom of Qin, and unified them into one massive realm called China. But in the last years of his life, few, if anyone, saw him. The emperor lived in the most magnificent palace built to date in the capital of Xinyang. The palace had 270 pavilions. All of these were connected by secret underground passageways, allowing the emperor to move through the palace without anyone seeing him. He slept in a different room every night, and anyone who inadvertently laid eyes on him was immediately beheaded. Only a handful of men knew his whereabouts, and if they revealed it to anyone, they too were put to death. The first emperor had grown so terrified of human contact that when he had to leave the palace, he traveled incognito, disguising himself carefully. On one such trip through the provinces, he suddenly died. His body was borne back to the capital on the emperor's carriage, with a cart packed with salted fish trailing behind it to cover up the smell of the rotting corpse. No one was to know of his death. He died alone, far from his wives, his family, his friends, and his courtiers. accompanied only by a minister and a handful of eunuchs. Shi Huangti started off as the king of Qin, a fearless warrior of unbridled ambition. Writers of the time described him as a man with a waspish nose, eyes like slits, and the voice of a jackal, with the heart of a tiger or a wolf. He could be merciful sometimes, but more often he swallowed up men without a scruple. It was through trickery and violence that he conquered the provinces surrounding his own and created China, forging a single nation and culture out of many. He broke up the feudal system, and to keep an eye on many of his members of the royal families that were scattered across the realm's various kingdoms, he moved 120,000 of them to the capital, where he housed the most important of courtiers in the vast palace of Xiyang. He consolidated the many walls on the borders and built them into the Great Wall of China. He standardized the country's law, its written language, even the size of its cartwheels. As part of his process of unification, however, the first emperor outlawed the writings and teachings of Confucius, the philosopher whose ideas on the moral life had already become virtually a religion in Chinese culture. On Sang's order, thousands of books relating to Confucius were burned, and anyone who quoted Confucius was to be beheaded. This made many enemies for the emperor, and he grew constantly afraid, even paranoid. The executions mounted. A contemporary, the writer Han Fei Su, noted that Qin has been victorious for 4 generations, yet has lived in constant terror and apprehension of destruction. As the emperor withdrew deeper and deeper into the palace to protect himself, he slowly lost control of the realm. Eunuchs and ministers enacted policy practices without his approval or even his knowledge. They also plotted against him. By the end, he was emperor in name only and was so isolated that barely anyone knew he had died. He had probably been poisoned by the same scheming ministers who encouraged his isolation. That is what isolation brings. Retreat into the fortress, and you lose contact with your sources of power. You lose your ear for what is happening around you, as well as a sense of proportion. Instead of being safer, you cut yourself off from the kind of knowledge on which your life depends. Never enclose yourself so far from the streets that you cannot hear what's happening around you, including the plots against you.
Law 19. Know who you are dealing with. Do not offend the wrong person. There are many different kinds of people in the world, and you can never assume that everyone will react to your strategies in the same way. Deceive or outmaneuver some people, and they will spend the rest of their lives seeking revenge. They are wolves in lamb's clothing. Choose your victims and opponents carefully then. Never offend or deceive the wrong person.
Law 19. Law 19 can be boiled down to opponents, suckers, and victims. A preliminary typology. In your rise to power, you will come across many breeds of opponent, sucker, and victim. The highest form of the art of power is the ability to distinguish the wolves from the lambs, the foxes from the hares, the hawks from the vultures. If you make this distinction well, you will succeed without needing to coerce anyone too much. But if you deal blindly with whomever crosses your path, you will have a life of constant sorrow, if you even live that long. Being able to recognize types of people and to act accordingly is critical. The following are the 5 most dangerous and difficult types of mark in the jungle, as identified by artists, con and otherwise, in the past. The arrogant and proud man. Although he may initially disguise it, this man's touchy pride makes him very dangerous. Any perceived slight will lead to a vengeance of overwhelming violence. You may say to yourself, but I only said such and such at a party where everyone was drunk. It does not matter. There is no sanity behind his overreaction, so do not waste time trying to figure him out. If at any point in your dealings with a person you sense an oversensitive or overreactive pride, flee. Whatever you're hoping for, it isn't worth it from him. The hopelessly insecure man. This man is related to the proud and arrogant type, but is less violent and harder to spot. His ego is fragile, his sense of self insecure, and if he feels himself deceived or attacked, the hurt will simmer. He will attack you in bites that will take forever to get big enough for you to notice. If you find you have deceived or harmed such a man, disappear for a long time. Do not stay around him, or he will nibble you to death. Mr. Suspicion. Another variant on the breeds above, this is a future Joe Stalin. He sees what he wants to see, usually the worst, in other people, and imagines that everyone is after him. Mr. Suspicion is in fact the least dangerous of the 3. Genuinely unbalanced, he's easy to deceive, just as Stalin himself was constantly deceived. Play on his suspicious nature to get him to turn against other people. But if you do become the target of his suspicions, watch out. The serpent with a long memory. If hurt or deceived, this man will show no anger on the surface. He will calculate and wait. Then, when he is in a position to turn the tables, he will exact a revenge marked by cold-blooded shrewdness. Recognize this man by his calculation and cunning in the different area of his life. He is usually cold and unaffectionate. Be doubly careful of this snake, and if you have somehow injured him, either crush him completely or get him out of your sight. The plain, unassuming, and often unintelligent man. Your ears prick up when you find such a tempting victim, but this man is a lot harder to deceive than you imagine. Falling for a ruse often takes intelligence or imagination, a sense of the possible rewards. The blunt man will not take the bait because he does not recognize it. He is that unaware. The danger with this man is not that he will harm you or seek revenge, but merely that he will waste your time, energy, and resources, even your sanity, if you're trying to deceive him. Have a test ready for a mark, a joke, a story. If his reaction is utterly literal, this is the type you're dealing with. Continue at your own risk.
Law 20. Do not commit to anyone. It is the fool who always rushes to take sides. Do not commit to any side or cause but yourself. By maintaining your independence, you become the master of others, playing people against one another, making them pursue you.
If you allow other people to feel that they possess you to any degree, you lose all your power over them. By not committing your affections, they will only try harder to win you over. Stay aloof, and you will gain power that comes from their attentions and frustrated desire. Play the virgin queen. Give them hope, but never satisfaction. You must learn the tricks that will enhance your image. Emanate mystery and desirability, never discouraging anyone's hopes, but never yielding. When you hold yourself back, you incur not anger, but a kind of respect. You instantly seem powerful because you make yourself ungraspable, rather than succumbing to the group or to the relationship as most people do. As your reputation for independence grows, more and more people will come to desire you, wanting to be the one that gets you to commit. The moment you commit, the magic is gone. You become like everyone else. People will try all kinds of underhanded methods to get you to commit. They will give you gifts, shower you with favors, all to put you under obligation. Accept the gifts and the favors if you so desire, but be careful to maintain your inner aloofness. You cannot inadvertently allow yourself to feel obligated to anyone. Encourage the attention, stimulate the interest, but do not commit at any cost. The goal is not to put people off or to make it seem like you're incapable of commitment. You have to bend to their attention occasionally, then, but never too far. Desire is like a virus. If we see that someone is desired by other people, we tend to find this person desirable too. Like the Virgin Queen, you need to stir the pot, excite the interest, and lure people with the possibility of having
Law
you.
21. Play a sucker to catch a sucker. Seem dumber than your mark. No one likes feeling stupider than the next person. The trick is to make your victims feel smart, and not just smart, but smarter than you are. Once convinced of this, they will never suspect that you may have ulterior motives.
The Chinese have a phrase, masquerading as a swine to kill the tiger. This refers to an ancient hunting technique in which the hunter clothes himself in the hide and snout of a pig and mimics its grunting. Masquerading as a swine works wonders on those who, like tigers, are arrogant and overconfident. The easier they think it is to prey on you, the more easily you can turn the tables. The trick is also useful if you are ambitious yet find yourself low on the hierarchy. Appearing less intelligent than you are, even a bit of a fool, is the perfect disguise. Look like a harmless pig and no one will believe that you harbor dangerous ambitions. They may even promote you since you seem so likable and subservient. In general, men always make people think that they are smarter and more sophisticated than you are. They will keep you around because you make them feel better about themselves, and the longer you are around, the more opportunities you will have to deceive them. The mighty tiger thinks the pig is coming his way and lets it get close, savoring the prospect of an easy meal. But it is the hunter who has the last laugh.
Law 22. Use the surrender tactic. Transform weakness into power. When you are weaker, never fight for honor's sake. Choose surrender instead. Surrender gives you time to recover, time to torment and irritate your conqueror, Time to wait for his power to wane. Do not give him the satisfaction of fighting and defeating you. Surrender first. By turning the other cheek, you infuriate and unsettle him. Make surrender a tool of power.
In 473 BC, in ancient China, King Guzhan of Yu suffered a horrible defeat from the ruler of Wu in the Battle of Fujiao. Guzhan wanted to flee, but he had an advisor who told him to surrender and place himself in the service of the ruler of Wu, from which position he could study the man and plot his revenge. Deciding to follow his advice, Guzhan gave the ruler all of his riches and went to work in his conqueror's stables as the lowest of servants. For 3 years he humbled himself before the ruler, who then, finally satisfied to his loyalty, allowed him to return home. Inwardly, however, Gozhan had spent those 3 years gathering information and plotting revenge. When a terrible drought struck Wu, and the kingdom was weakened by inner turmoil, he raised an army, invaded, and won with ease. That is the power behind surrender. It gives you the time and the flexibility to plot a devastating counterblow. Had Gozhan run away, he would have lost his chance.
Law 23. Concentrate your forces. Conserve your forces and energies by keeping them concentrated at their strongest point. You gain more by finding a rich mine and mining it deeper than by flitting from one shallow mine to another. Intensity defeats extensity every time. When looking for sources of power to elevate you, find one key patron, the fat cow who will give you milk for a long time to come.
Are you in a state of total distraction and diffusion, hardly able to keep your mind in one direction before you're pulled in 1,000 others? The modern world's level of conflict is higher than ever, and you may internalize it in your life. The solution is a form of retreat inside to yourself and the past, to a more concentrated forms of thought and action. Single-mindedness of purpose, total concentration of a goal, and then these qualities you use against people who are less focused. Such an arrow will find its mark every time and overwhelm the enemy. This is what happened to ancient Athens, which lusted for a faraway city of Sicily and ended up losing its empire. The Romans stretched the boundaries of their empire to encompass vast territories. In doing so, they increased their vulnerability and the chances of invasion from yet another barbarian tribe. Their useless expansion led their empire into oblivion. Concentrate on a single goal, a single task, and beat it into submission. You will need help from other people, usually those who are more powerful than you. More energy is saved and more power is attained when you affix yourself to a single appropriate source of power. Power itself always exists in concentrated forms. In any organization, it is inevitable for a small group to hold the strings, and often it is not those with the titles. In the game of power, only the fool flails about without fixing on a target. You cannot hit 2 targets with 1 arrow. If your thoughts stray, you miss your enemy's heart. Mind and arrow must become one.
Law 24. Play the perfect courtier. The perfect courtier thrives in a world where everything revolves around power and political dexterity. He has mastered the art of indirection. He flatters, yields to superiors, and asserts power over others in the most oblique and gracious manner. Learn to apply the laws of courtship, and there will be no limit to how far you can rise in the court.
We will close this half of the 48 Laws of Power with the 15 Laws of Courtly Politics as they are laid out under Law 24. Play the perfect courtier. The royal court may have more or less disappeared, or at least lost its power, but courts and courtiers still exist because power still exists. The laws that govern court politics are as timeless as the laws of power. There is much to be learned, then, from great courtiers past and present. The 15 Laws of Court Politics. 1. Avoid ostentation. It is never prudent to prattle on about yourself or call too much attention to your actions. 2. Practice nonchalance. Never seem to be working too hard. 3. Be frugal with flattery. It may seem that your superiors cannot get enough flattery, but too much of even a good thing loses its value. 4. Arrange to be noticed. There is a paradox. You cannot display yourself too brazenly, yet you must also get yourself noticed. 5. Alter your style and language according to the person that you're dealing with. The pseudo-belief in equality, the idea that talking and acting the same way with everyone, no matter what their rank, makes you somehow the paragon of civilization, is a terrible mistake. 6. Never be the bearer of bad news. 7. Never affect friendliness and intimacy with your master. He does not want a friend for a subordinate. He wants a subordinate. 8. Never criticize those above you directly. This may seem obvious, but there are often times when some sort of criticism is necessary. To say nothing or give no advice would open you to risks of another sort. You must learn to couch your advice and criticism as indirectly and politely as possible. 9. Be frugal in asking those above you for favors. Nothing irritates a master more than having to reject someone's request. 10. Never joke about appearances or tastes. A lively wit and humorous disposition are essential qualities for a good courtier, and there are often times when vulgarity is appropriate and engaging. But avoid any kind of joke about appearance or taste, two highly sensitive areas, especially with those above you. 11. Do not be the court cynic. Express admiration for the good work of others. If you constantly criticize your equals or subordinates, some of that criticism will rub off on you, hovering over you like a gray cloud wherever you go. 12. Be self-servient. The mirror is a miraculous invention. Without it, you could commit great sins against beauty and decorum. You must be the mirror, training your mind to see yourself as others see you. 13. Master your emotions. As an actor in a great play, you must learn to cry and laugh on command when it is appropriate. 14. Fit the spirit of the times. A slight affection of the past era can be charming as long as you choose a period at least 20 years back. Wearing the fashions of 10 years ago is ludicrous, unless you enjoy your role as court jester. Your spirit and way of thinking must keep up with the times, and even if the times offend your sensibilities, you are best off at least being able to mimic the spirit of the times. 15. Be a source of pleasure. This is critical. It is an obvious law of human nature that we will flee that which is unpleasant or distasteful, while charm and the promise of delight will draw us like moths to a flame. Courtiers are like magicians. They deceptively play with appearances, only letting those around them see what they want them to see. With so much deception and manipulation afoot, it is essential to keep people from seeing your tricks and glimpsing your sleights of hand. That's all, ladies and gentlemen, for part 1 of my presentation of the 48 Laws of Power. Part 2 will be coming at an arbitrary time, probably sometime this weekend. I hope you've all gleaned some information from this, and perhaps maybe even some pleasure. Thank you again for joining me, and I will continue with some more lighthearted things next week. Stay safe, good luck, and goodbye.